Hello, everyone. You have just tuned into 96.5 FM KZAA with the lovely Siobhan Hoover and Ana Rosa Rizzo Centino, the Que Madre radio show, along with Warrior Mother. And today we decided to go a bit unscripted just because it's pretty darn hot. And we just want to have a free flowing conversation. One of the things that we did want to talk about to start with is just Black and Brown unity and feeling like that's something that for both of us keeps coming up as something that we need to work on as communities, and just seeing that we have so much more in common than we have of what separates us. So yeah, just really thankful to you, Siobhan, for introducing that topic because I think it is always important. So yeah, let's talk about it.
Yeah, well, for me, it's it's deeply rooted in my heart. I come from a mixed family, mixed background. In fact, both of my parents were mixed. And so, looking at myself and how to identify growing up was really difficult, right? It was that I wasn't quite Black enough or Mexican enough, certainly not white enough. I had the Filipino side and the Native American side. So, I'm just kind of the melting pot of America, and always had trouble understanding where groups had biases against each other. And because I found that there are more similarities than differences, as you mentioned, between my families or the different sides of my families. I know that when my grandfather and my grandmother had gotten together, they were very young, they were in high school. My grandmother is, her family's from Mexico, and my grandfather, they are African American, originally from Louisiana, but deeply rooted in Santa Barbara for generations. And they had a lot of strife in their relationship. They had a lot of people coming against them, particularly their parents were not really happy with that. And back then, of course, it was frowned upon, right? You don't cross over, but the heart wants what the heart wants. And so from there, my dad's side of the family was created, and I just felt like if certain conversations happen within our families, that a lot more grace and empathy and love will prevail, right? Rather than the hate and the distaste for someone else's culture. I don't know. What do you think about that?
I mean, I think love always wins, and I'm so glad that your grandparents came together to create you, and just all the joy and strength that you bring to our communities. I think with looking at the differences, those differences are often manufactured, and I feel like part of it is just the fact that we live in a capitalistic society. And I know I talk about this a lot, but I do think it's the root of a lot of the issues that we have in our communities is capitalism, and communities feeling like they have to fight against each other for the scraps, right? For the crumbs. And I think once we see how capitalism divides us, we can see how actually we can create alternative systems that unite us and that bring us together. And I love how creative people are, like the Mujeres Market and the Youth Makers Market, and just all the folks that are coming together to literally do that, come together and show all the beautiful things that we can create, and create economies that kind of help uplift each other. So I love that you get to partake in those two with your oils and just your relationships with Shalhoub and different folks that are in the community. And I just think it's really inspiring that even with this overarching capitalist system that we live in, that there are, these alternative models that are being created to unite folks. And I think that unity is, and that love is what's always going to prevail as long as we keep centered on our relationships and not throwing people away.
Absolutely, yes. I don't think that people tend to see or realize the evils that capitalism, but one thing that I do know is that when people unite, they are certainly more powerful together more than anything. An unfortunate reality in many cultures is that colorism exists. So, it's the dark folks versus the light skinned folks. And I don't say that as something that I think, but you see it, you see it in these cultures. And it's like, okay, well, how do we get around that? How do we begin these conversations? How do we educate our families, our friends? How do we get away from these things that certainly put people in categories and in a box? Like our brains naturally do that, but to be able to recognize the differences and still have certain levels of respect and compassion for other beings. I'm not sure where the difficulty lies in that.
Well, I think the first step is naming it, because you look at it with media, and I don't even mean just like United States and the media in this country, but even if you look at Mexico and the media over there, like when you watch telenovelas, you see that the darker skin, like indigenous folks, are the ones who are the maids, and the ones who own the houses are, the light skinned, blonde,
Yeah,
blue-eyed people, that it's very apparent. It's not even like hidden. But I think sometimes people don't stop to do that critical analysis of like the things that they're observing on an everyday basis. So the more that we can name things, the more that we can stop them and create alternative ways of expressing ourselves and uplifting communities of color of all shades, including the dark shades.
absolutely, yes. And I had a brief conversation with my son about this. He's darker skinned, and he had noticed that there are only a few kids at his school that maybe are a darker shade like he is. And I said, well, isn't that beautiful to be unique? You should celebrate that. Isn't that a beautiful thing that you get to stand out that in that way? I know that some people, some kids, they don't like to stand out. They want to blend in. However, to take pride in the way you look. And I said, look, you've got people who lay out in the sun for hours just to get to your tone, and guess what? They're never going to get there. Never going to get there. And look at you, you're all naturally just all melanated and really breathing life into him and anyone else for that matter who has an insecurity about it. Really just uplifting folks and letting them know that unique is good.
Yeah, I mean, those folks are probably gonna get red and end up with a sunburn healing. But that's what's ironic about it, right? It's like in certain places, like those features are uplifted, and then other ways they're not. So it's like, as mothers, how do we uplift our children in all the beautiful ways that they look and make sure that they love themselves and also love ourselves? Because I think it's apparent to our kids, like if we don't love ourselves, they catch on to that. And I think the more we can break the cycles of self-hate and just like really, really love ourselves and treat ourselves with tenderness and grace that we often afford to others, but we can't give to ourselves. Even if it's just for the sake of wanting kids that love themselves, I feel like that should be enough motivation to do that work for ourselves. And for me, it's definitely been a journey. I mean, I started with talk therapy and now I'm doing somatic therapy, and I feel like it's made a world of difference. And it's also been a process that has taken years. And it's also being part of the Chicano community, where sometimes mental health issues are stigmatized. It's like, no, I'm not crazy just because I'm seeking help. Actually, that means that I'm very healthy and I'm trying to be healthier.
Right. We do need to change those conversations and believing that seeking out help is a bad thing, or that it's frowned upon, in some cultures. Also, as a mother and as a woman, we're very hard on ourselves, right? We are our own worst critics. And so you had mentioned the self-love part of it and demonstrating that, really modeling that for our children, which means, when you're looking in the mirror, you need to look at yourself in a positive way. But not only that, be wary of what you're speaking out loud. So, you can sit here and be in the mirror and pick yourself apart while your daughter's watching, and you are modeling that behavior for her. So then she's going to get in the mirror and do the same thing. She's going to pick herself apart. But if you stand in the mirror and you're like, yep, this is me, don't you love it, and kind of, give yourself a little credit where it's due, it sets a different tone for how you perceive yourself. Um, and in that, it's like believing that you can or you can't, right? What's this the saying? It says whether you can or you can't. Oh gosh, I'm gonna murder it. But in any case, it's all in your mind. So if you can, you believe that you cannot. That's what you're telling yourself, is you cannot. Your mind
Like a
gives up.
self-fulfilling prophecy.
Yes. Your mind, and I have this conversations with my clients at the gym, is that your body gives up when your mind does. Your mind is the one that controls this. So if in your mind you're telling yourself that you cannot, you will not be able to. But if you sit there and, yes, I can do this. I tell my clients all the time, yes, you can. You got two more. Yes, you can. You can get through it. That you believe it. So it's really how powerful the mind is. And then of course, again, just how we relay that to our children and to others around us.
Yeah. I mean, I love that you brought in that that sense of belief, and I think not only is it a body issue, but as you said, it's a huge mental issue. And I feel like when I look back on my K through 12 education, the teachers got the most out of me, where I learned the most. It was the ones that challenged me and that they knew that I was capable of more, and it's like when people have this belief in you that they know that you can rise to the occasion, you rise to the occasion. But when it's clear that people don't believe in you, then I think that's when things get rough. And that's how you see like the K through 12 system breaking down in a lot of places, where it just becomes about like standardized testing, and like filling in bubbles, and it's no longer about learning. Then there's a breakdown. And I feel like that mind body connection is so important. And as mothers, we are our kids' first teachers. So if we can model that like belief in them and that love, it's like that's a magic combination.
Absolutely, yes. And don't get me started on the school system, because I it, we need holistic care, right? And in that, I feel that a huge part that's lacking in our systems is the mental health part. I know that some of the schools are now starting to educate the children on different being aware of what mental health means, what is out there, what resources are available to them. But a lot of times those resources, everyone's so backed up. And so these students are not able to get the care that's needed. So it's so important as family members know that, whether it's your own child or a niece or a nephew or a cousin that might need a little support, just because you're a parent doesn't mean that you don't have to be involved. There's so many out there that don't have children that can still be involved in so many ways.
Absolutely. And even though like I think the one-on-one mental health care is really important, I think also group care can be huge for some people, like AA, or even just like peer support. I know when I was in high school, there was a peer mentorship class, a peer counseling class, excuse me, where I got to learn how to, do simple things like active listening, so that if somebody, doesn't have the access to a therapist that they pay like, I don't know, $100 an hour or more, that they can, talk to a peer and also get some support. And I just wonder like how far reaching that is, because I know my high school did it, but I don't think a lot of high schools have programs like that. So how do we increase access for students to be able to learn these really important skills, and be able to kind of lean on each other, in the absence of, sometimes our families just don't have access to healthcare that is quality or that is affordable.
Absolutely. We're going to take a pause here for station identification. You are listening to KZAA 96.5 FMLP. You are listening to the Que Madre radio show with Ana Rosa Risa Centino, and I am Siobhan Hoover, Warrior Mother. And today we are just having a candid conversation all about everything.
Black, brown unity, mental health, loving ourselves.
One thing that I'm grateful for is the team group that my soul sister Allie and I facilitate. We only reach a small group at a time. But in that, we are talking, coping mechanisms for stress, for anxiety, how to actively listen, how to be a good friend, how to recognize when you don't have a good friend. So a lot of these things that it's not so much touched on in school. However, these issues are coming up for these young ladies. And it's like, okay, well, how do I deal with this person who is saying that they're my friend, but every time I tell them something, they're going and telling everybody else. It's like, well, you have to learn who to trust, right? And even as adults, we go through that. But something that I think kids learn early on is who they can talk to and who they can't. And it's just, for me, it's always kind of this like refresher course for myself when I'm working with the teens. So not only is it, kind of breathing life into them and to give them these little life hacks that I've learned at this age, but it's a check-in with myself. Well, wait a second, do I have friends that are just drawing, energy from me? And
Energy vampires.
yeah, a lot out there. But I do have to say that I am blessed with a sister circle that is incredibly uplifting. The women who I'm surrounded by, you being one of them, I just adore you for everything that you're all about and that you represent, you bring to the table. But I have really cultivated these sisters. The sister circle around me is just really incredible and supportive. And anytime that I need to talk, I know where I can go. So, really surrounding yourself with the right group of people is equally as important as any of the other mental health services. And finding reasons to celebrate life.
That feeling is so mutual. I love and adore you and just think you are the bee's knees. And I feel like something that I wanted to ask you about that I've been struggling with is how to teach our kids discernment, which I think is a very important skill, but it's also hard, at least for me, to teach in a way, because the way I learned discernment was not the best in my opinion. Because as a kid, I was just like loving and I trusted everyone. And I think my mom saw that as a weakness. And, like I remember there was this one time when I got my purse stolen as a kid. And I still can like vividly see this conversation happening between my mom and I, because she worked as a cafeteria worker in the same elementary that I went to school at. And she's like, you can't trust people, and unfortunately, a lot of times there's envy involved. And if people envy you, they're going to want to take things from you. And while I'm sure like she said all these things like out of a good intention to make sure I didn't get hurt, I feel like it also instilled a very deep fear in me of like trusting people and like having friendships. And somehow in all kinds of relationships, wondering when the next shoe is going to drop. Like, no, this can't be as good as I think this is. This friendship can't be as real as I think it is. At some point, they're going to disappoint me, and I just have to like guard myself and be ready for when they try to either steal something emotionally or just like hurt me in some kind of way. And so because I had that experience, now I wonder, like, how do I teach my daughter discernment in a way that doesn't make her fearful of others? Because I think fear is our biggest enemy, and it keeps us from doing so many things that we can do if we lean into love.
Absolutely. 110%. So, you know, my mom was always like, well, you brace for the worst, like expect the worst, but hope for the best kind of thing. And to me, that was like such a sad um outlook, right? And I, I know that a lot of times we do come from a loving place where we're like, well, you can't trust people because that is real life. That is truly, are most people good or are most people bad, or those people bad with good intentions or good with bad intentions? So to me, when the word discernment comes up, I think about trusting yourself and your intuition. And we're not tapped into that when we're younger, right? It takes time to develop. It takes time to feel. Although there are some kids who are naturally, they feel the vibe, they feel the energy. So my daughter is one of those people where if she doesn't like something, if she feels off in any way, she's like, absolutely not. And you're not going to change her mind for a thing. But whenever, this is the way I would describe it. So, when sometimes you walk in a room and all of a sudden there's like a weird kind of lull, or you walk into a room, you feel like people are talking about you, that kind of thing. That feeling in your body is something that you trust, that you get in touch with, that you start to, you feel that and you're like, maybe you know, maybe I'm being out of my mind right now, but maybe there was something to that. Or someone walks into a room and suddenly you're like, oh, yuck, like just get me out of here. I think those are huge indicators of, discernment, and whether or not you can trust being in that situation or being with those people, or, but there's certainly a balance in the way that we have to teach that. So it's like, well, for example, my son tells his friend something, and then the friend goes and tells other people, and he's really upset that, he didn't keep it a secret. And so it's like, okay, well, first, did you communicate that you didn't want this information shared? If you did communicate and that you didn't want this information shared and they shared it anyway, well, then from here on out, that you can't go to this person with something that you hold sacred. If it's really important to you, then you have to find which friends that you can, tell your secrets to, and what friends you can't. And and that's not an easy process. And unfortunately, it's part of life's lessons. It's part of learning, about life in general. So I wholeheartedly, I feel that it's a difficult subject, especially with younger folks, but even as adults, I think that we all struggle with that.
Yeah, I totally see what you're saying. So instead of telling people or your kids specifically, don't trust, it's like kind of a trial and error situation where, yeah, it's fine to have friends and try on the trust with each person. And then as people show you that your trust is well kept, then continue to trust those people. And, so give people the benefit of the doubt. But then if they show you that they're not trustworthy, then that's when you have to kind of roll it back and not trust those particular people as much, but not just a blanket, don't trust people, right?
Right. I mean, and it's like, well, you want to say, well, be guarded. But what I tell them is guard your heart. Guard your heart and be careful who you allow in. Not everyone is deserving of your heart space. And even that sounds so like negative, but it's like, yeah, you cannot let everybody in to your, you know, into your spaces. And so um, that's an incredible lesson that, like I said, kids and adults alike, we're all learning.
Yeah, I feel like this goes back to like that black and brown unity that we're trying to cultivate is like, how do we open ourselves to each other when, there have been maybe miscommunications in the past or hurt feelings in the past. And like, then where's the space for restoration, when those misunderstandings or hurts happen? Um, because I think before the call or Zoom or radio show started today, I was mentioning to you that there are definitely offenses that happen that make it clear that certain people shouldn't be allowed in movement spaces. That does exist. However, sometimes I feel like that expulsion can be the go to instead of actually figuring out first, wait, yes, this thing that happened hurt. And also, is there a way to overcome it and rebuild the trust that was lost?
Absolutely, yeah. And there's going to be levels of disappointment in work and in your family and with friends. And that's something that's part of life. It does require a level of vulnerability. And but to me, it's worth it, right? It's everything stems from fear or love. And and I used to have a huge fear of being vulnerable. Like, I do not like the idea of it. To me, it felt weak. And what I'm seeing now is actually being vulnerable. That's actually a strength. I admire that in people who can be open and honest and really and it goes back to the whole unity thing. It requires you to open yourself up a little bit and you know be open.
Yes, be open. I am.
So and so you are listening to the Kimale Radio Show here with Ana Rosa Rizo Centino. And I'm Siobhan Hoover of Warrior Mother, listening to KZAA 96.5 FMLP.
And we are in the last 10 minutes of our show. So, what would you like to leave our listeners with today as a final topic?
Yeah. Oh, wow. Gosh. No, I think that something that has been kind of really on my mind and things is allowing ourselves grace, being compassionate with ourselves, allowing ourselves to make mistakes, to learn from them. Big word that came up for me today during a meeting was imposter syndrome. And so, yeah, that was kind of like a heavy, like, that was chunky.
Yeah, and I think imposter syndrome sometimes can become like this very individual thing where it's like we don't feel like we measure up. But actually, sometimes to me, after reflecting on it, I realized that the imposter syndrome comes because these systems that we're trying to fit into were not built for us. And we actually have to build alternative systems in which we all fit, in which we all feel empowered, so that we don't have people feeling like them bringing their whole selves is an impediment. And it's actually a strength to bring your whole self. Because I find with myself, being a queer woman of color in different meetings that I go to, it's like I make a quick assessment of the folks who are in the room and see like which parts of myself is it okay for me to bring in the room and which parts do I have to leave outside of the room. And at the age of now 43 years old, I have decided I'm done with that. Like, I'm bringing my whole self no matter where I go. And if people like it, cool. And if not, that's fine too. But at least I'm being authentic and not betraying myself.
Yes. And that's absolutely it. It's the fear of how others will view you, right? it's me projecting on how they're going to think. What are they going to think of me? What do they, what if they think I'm this or that? And it's like, at this point in my life, I'm not sure that I care. You know, here's me, here's who I'm showing up as. Um, here are my ideas, or whatever the case is, and whether or not you feel I belong in this space. Well, I'm here and I'm showing up and I'm taking up space. And so that has been like a revelation hit me this morning, because I do find that when I show up authentically as myself, I feel better. I feel like I belong here. I am valuable. I am worthy, absolutely worthy of being here. And so I think that a lot of us need to take a look at that. And whether it be in your relationships, your friendships, your workspace, whatever it might be, is the idea of other people's opinions of you shaping how you act or how you present yourself. It does no service to you. It's of no value to you to change who you are based on what you think, how other people will perceive you.
I'm going to say hallelujah to all of that. And also to say that I love those three words, take up space. Because I think sometimes we're scared to take up space and we actually shrink ourselves because we think we're going to be too much for other people. And personally, I actually rather be too much than not enough. So, take up that space, feel confident in it, speak your truth. And I think that people have so much to learn from each other. And if we just open ourselves to each other, open our hearts, open our minds, then there's just so much further that we can go as communities building a movement together.
Absolutely, yes. And I think that even in all the movements that are happening, around the world, I would say, it's so it brings so much more value, right? When people show up, when they take up space, when they are who they are, it's so liberating internally for them, but then also to see it, when I see, someone like you, and I'm here, I'm taking up space, and here's what I have to say. I'm like all like giddy inside, because to me it's like, yes, that's how it should be. Even though it's something that it's like I struggle, I struggle to be that way, but at least I'm aware of it and I'm conscious, and all working, it's all progress, it's all forward motion.
Well, we both exist in this nonprofit world, and I think sometimes it becomes this thing where we're able to talk about identity issues when we're in a justice, equity, diversity, and inclusion training. But when we try to bring up these issues outside of those trainings, it's like, "Oh, how dare she?" you know? And it's like, well, actually, if you are serious and you mean it when you say you're trying to uplift Black, Indigenous people of color, then you need to hear our voices at all times, not just in these trainings, and I'm done catering to like white lady tears and like that white fragility. And it's like, okay, you need to take care of that on your own. I'm not your teacher. And sometimes folks got to read some books, they got to talk to some people. It's not up to us to tell them how to be a decent human being.
Yeah, and that's, an unfortunate reality, is that sometimes the lack of understanding, the lack of empathy, um, coming from that side is like, well, take a moment to really take a deep dive into history and to see, from someone else's perspective, what is it like, from our perspective as a person of color, as a woman of color. Try to see someone, or walk in someone else's shoes for a moment and see what that feels like, and have, again, the compassion and the empathy, and the understanding, but really be willing and open to be educated or to learn, right?
Mhm.
These
And
things,
allow us to do things differently, right? Because I feel like sometimes folks only want us to check a box, but after we have checked that box for them and we are trying to explore different ways of organizing, different ways of moving our organizations forward, then it's like, how dare they? It's like, no, we are the reason why we are bringing these different ways of being is because we are different. And that's not a bad thing, that's a good thing. And our new movement is going to be so much richer because we are trying different ways of being in community with each other. Because as we have seen, the old way doesn't work. If it did work, we would be much further along than we are.
yes, yes. And I'm all about, cultivating the change. I had written down a quote earlier. It says, I want things to change as long as it stays the same for me. And so, for our allies, that is that's huge. A huge part of it is, yeah, things might get a little bit uncomfortable for you. It's been uncomfortable for us for how how long. And so if you have to shift, if you have to make a change somewhere, like be open to it and really embrace it. But again, change is difficult for people, and but for our allies that are in it and are willing and able to, um, I applaud them, because I know that also takes a level of courage and bravery on their part to be part of the change.
And just for folks listening, allies is not a term you give yourself. It's actually a term that you earn after acting as an ally and showing up for Black, Indigenous people of color and queer people and people of disability. Then you get to be an ally. You don't get to claim it without doing anything about it. And on that, I know we are out of time, but thank you all so much for listening. And Siobhan's going to do that last station identification before we say peace out.
Thank you for listening, everyone. You were listening to the Kim Madre Radio Show here with Ana Rosa Rizzo Centino. I am Siobhan Hoover of Warrior Mother on KCAA 96.5 FMLP. Again, thank you so much for listening today. We appreciate you. Have a good one.